The wind carried the smell of wood smoke through the quiet settlement, curling into the narrow lanes where cabins leaned against one another like weary companions. It was the late 1800s, when the frontier was still rough around the edges, and every day asked something of those who lived on its strength, silence, and often sacrifice. Nights were long, the stars brighter than lanterns, and each door closed against the wild held its own story. On such a night, with the fire burning low and the world hushed into stillness, she came knocking. Her hand trembled, though not from the cold, and her words, soft as a confession, fell into the space between them. Just for tonight? No one in the village saw her cross the empty dirt road, nor did anyone hear the crunch of her boots against frost-stiffened earth. She had moved like a shadow slipping away from its owner. Behind her, the cabins were darkened, families already gathered in sleep. But ahead of her burned the steady flame from a single hearth. That light, a restless flicker of orange and gold, was her destination. It drew her closer, steadying her steps even as her heart twisted with fear of what she was about to ask. In this place, in this time, no request was small, and none went without consequence. He had been inside, stripped to the waist after long hours spent mending tools and chopping wood, his dark hair falling loose across his shoulders. A necklace of turquoise, a gift from his people, rested against his chest. He had never needed much, only the land, the hunt, and the silence of his thoughts. But when the knock came, sharp against the rough-hewn timber of the door, his heart jolted. He opened it without hesitation, and there she stood. Her red hair caught the firelight behind her, her face pale, lips parted as if she had run all the way to his cabin and only now allowed herself to breathe. Their eyes locked. For a moment, neither spoke. The night seemed to lean closer, listening. He had always noticed her before, though they came from different worlds. She belonged to the settlers, their ways carried across the ocean, while he bore the weight of the old traditions tied to this land long before cabins rose from it. In the market, their glances had crossed. At the well, they had exchanged brief words, polite but cautious. Still, something lived in the silence between them, something neither dared to name, until tonight. Her voice was hardly more than a whisper, but it carried the strength of decision. Just for tonight, she said, as if rehearsed, as if those words had been turning over in her mouth for weeks, maybe months. The request was simple and sound, yet heavy with meaning. She knew it. He knew it. And though she tried to steady her breathing, the truth quivered in her tone. She was not asking for a favor. She was not asking for safety. She was asking for something that could not be given lightly, something that would change the way. Dawn looked on both their lives. He studied her. Silent, the crackling fire from inside his cabin painting her face in soft, trembling light. He saw the fear in her eyes, but beneath it, something stronger resolve that no one would have guessed lived inside her. Her people would not approve. His people would not forgive. The village itself, small and watchful, would whisper until the end of time if they ever knew. And yet, here she was, standing in front of him, her words unshaken despite the storm she risked unleashing. The world outside seemed to vanish. The howl of a wolf in the distance, the creak of trees in the winter wind. Even the smoke spiraling from chimneys, all of it faded as the two of them remained frozen in that moment. He should have turned her away. Logic demanded it. Tradition demanded it. But the weight in his chest, the pull he had felt each time. Their eyes lingered to Longmaid, the choice heavier than any battle he had fought with his hands. Her fingers curled against the wood of the doorframe, as if bracing herself. "I only ask for tonight," she said again, quieter this time, almost pleading. The flames inside his cabin cast long shadows over her figure, wrapping her in warmth that she had not yet stepped into. Her presence alone unsettled him, but not with anger. It was something else, something that had lived unspoken between them. A current that now demanded to be faced. He thought of the village, of the weight of duty, of the faces that would look at him differently come morning if they knew. He thought of her, of the fire in her spirit hidden beneath quiet obedience, of the way she looked at him now, not as stranger to stranger, not as settler to native, but as two souls who had found each other against the odds of the world. and for the first time he allowed himself to wonder what it would mean to let her in. Not just past his door, but past the guard he had carried all his life. Outside, the night pressed closer, the wind sighing against the logs of the cabin. The door remained open, the fire's glow spilling into the dark, waiting for his answer. She did not move. She did not look away. And he, though torn by 1,000 reasons to refuse, could not summon the words. The weight of his silence stretched between them, and in that silence, the choice loomed one that could bind their lives. Together in ways neither of them could undo, the knock she had given had been small, almost hesitant, but its echo lingered still, as if the wood itself remembered her touch. He could feel the pull of destiny in it, the kind of moment that divides life into before and after. He had lived through winters of hunger, through storms that toppled trees, through battles that left scars on his body. Yet nothing had prepared him for the decision that now stood at his door. Her eyes shone, reflecting the flame behind him. "Just for tonight," she said once more, and this time the words broke softly, carrying not just resolve but a secret ache he had not yet uncovered, something more than longing hid beneath them. Something she had not confessed but that drove her here, trembling and unyielding all the same. The fire inside hissed, logs collapsing into embers, sending sparks upward. His hand resting against the rough wood of the door tightened slightly, and though the world held its breath, waiting, he had yet to answer her plea. The night lingered on the edge of decision, suspended between two lives that could never return to what they were before. And in the quiet that followed, the question burned brighter than the fire itself. Would he let her in, or would the weight of tomorrow close the door forever? The answer had not yet been spoken, but already their lives had begun to change. The silence between them stretched, and the night seemed to lean heavier on their shoulders. She had spoken, asked her question with trembling certainty, and now all that remained was the weight of his answer. But instead of offering words, he stepped back from the doorway, letting the firelight spill outward in quiet invitation. She hesitated, her breath catching as if she were standing on the edge of a cliff. But then her boots moved forward, and she crossed the threshold into his world. Inside, the cabin smelled of smoke and pine, with shadows climbing the log walls like restless memories. A table stood to one side, rough and worn, with a single lantern and a few carved tools scattered across its surface. Against the far wall, a stack of firewood leaned neatly, ready for the winter cold. Everything about the space was simple, honest, yet heavy with solitude. She took it in quickly, her gaze pausing on the small details, as if each told her something about the man who lived here. He closed the door softly, sealing them away from the village outside. For the first time, she felt the full force of the silence pressing close. She had thought she wanted this moment, had dreamed of it in the secret corners of her mind. But standing there with him so near, she felt the truth of what she had risked. This was not a night that could be forgotten or brushed aside in the light of morning. This was a turning point, and every heartbeat reminded her of that. Her hands tightened at her sides, and she forced herself to speak, if only to break the heaviness between them. "I had nowhere else to go," she admitted, her voice steady though her chest ached with fear. She didn't mean it in the way it sounded. There were roofs and families nearby, doors that might have opened to her if she had asked. But none of them would have understood. None of them would have offered what she sought here tonight. In this cabin lit by a restless fire, he studied her with the same quiet patience that had always marked him. Words were not his way, and she knew it. He lived close to the earth, close to the rhythm of seasons and soil, where silence spoke louder than speech. But his eyes, dark, steady, unflinching, were not silent. They asked questions she could barely face herself. Why here? Why him? Why now? She turned from his gaze, moving toward the hearth where the flames cracked and hissed. The warmth brushed her face, thawing the chill of her long walk. She extended her hands toward it, though it wasn't the cold she feared anymore, was the weight of what she had chosen to do. She thought of her people, of the expectations that had wrapped around her life like ropes she had never untied. She thought of whispered rules about who she was allowed to love, who she was forbidden to even look at. And yet, despite every warning, every fear, here she stood, He finally spoke, his voice low, roughened by the quiet he carried. "You should not be here." It was not anger, not rejection, but a truth laid bare between them. His words carried the echo of caution, of the countless dangers that circled them both. He knew better than she did the price of stepping across invisible lines. But his tone, though heavy, lacked the certainty of a man ready to send her away. "I know," she whispered back, her eyes on the fire. "But I came anyway." The flames danced, throwing sparks upward, as if her words had given them life. He stood still, arms at his sides, the turquoise at his chest catching the light. For a long time, neither moved, as though the cabin itself was holding its breath. She thought of the first time she had seen him, not in passing at the market, not at the well, but truly seen him. It had been late summer, the fields golden with harvest, when she had watched him from across the distance as he worked with steady strength, guiding his people in their tasks. There had been something in his stance, in the unspoken dignity of his movements, that had rooted itself inside her heart. Since then, the thought of him had lingered, uninvited yet unshakable. But the story was not so simple. Her family had their own struggles, debts that whispered behind closed doors, disputes with neighbors that grew louder each season. She was expected to marry soon, to secure alliances, to ease burdens her family could not carry alone. The man chosen for her was steady, respected, but he stirred no fire within her. Each time his name was spoken, her chest tightened like a trap. Each time she was reminded of her duty, her thoughts strayed instead to the man who now stood across the cabin from her. He, too, had his burdens. His people watched him with expectation, trusting him to uphold the old ways in a world that pressed harder against them with each year. The settlers built more cabins, cleared more land, and still his voice was needed to keep peace, to hold tradition together in a time of change. To be seen with her, to allow what now hovered between them, would be to risk not just his own standing, but the fragile balance between two worlds already strained by mistrust. The danger should have been enough to silence them both, and yet here they were, bound not by reason but by something deeper, something unspoken that neither could deny. Her hands dropped to her sides, and she turned to face him fully, her voice stronger now, though her heart raced. "I know what I risk by being here. I know what it could mean for you. But tonight, I could not stay away." He drew a breath, slow and deliberate, as though steadying himself against the storm of her words. He wanted to tell her no, to send her back into the night where she belonged, before the fire between them burned, too hot to control. Yet he also knew it was too late. She had already crossed the threshold, not just into his cabin, but into the fragile shield he kept around his heart. The silence that followed was thick with everything they could not say. The world outside seemed far away, the villagers with their watchful eyes, the endless stretch of land that carried both promise and loss, the future that loomed like an unmarked road. In this moment, all that existed was the two of them, the fire, and the decision that hung in the air like a blade not yet fallen. He stepped closer, slow, deliberate, his shadow stretching across the firelit floor. She did not move, did not retreat, though her chest rose and fell quickly. The space between them narrowed until the air seemed alive with unspoken words. And then, as if the night itself sought to remind them of its dangers, a sound split the silence, a sharp crack outside, like a branch snapping beneath heavy boots. Both of them froze, the fire crackling loud in the sudden tension. His hand moved instinctively toward the door, his body tense, while her eyes widened, fear flashing through them. The knock she had given had been gentle, private, but this sound was different, harsh, intrusive, carrying the weight of someone else in the dark. He looked at her. She looked back, the question burning silently between them once more. Had they already been discovered? Was the night about to shatter before it had even begun? The cabin seemed smaller now, the firelight sharper, every second stretching longer than the last. Whatever waited outside remained unseen, but its presence pressed close, threatening to expose the fragile thread that bound them together. Neither spoke, neither moved. The night had changed, and the danger was no longer only in the choice they faced within, but also in the unknown that lingered. Just beyond the door, the fire snapped again, and he stood motionless, every muscle tensed, listening to the world outside. She held her breath, afraid even the faintest sound from her might give them away. In that small cabin, it felt as if the walls had drawn closer, pressing in on them. The sound had been sharp, purposeful, not like the natural breaking of branches in the wind. Someone was out there. Someone close. He moved toward the door, his steps steady. Though his eyes betrayed the storm that churned beneath the surface, she reached for him, her fingers brushing his arm before she realized what she was doing. The contact made him pause. Their eyes met, and for a heartbeat, all fear seemed to stop between them. But then the crackle of leaves came again, nearer this time, and the weight of reality pressed down on them both. "Stay here," he whispered, his voice low but commanding. He eased the latch of the door with care, pulling it open just enough to peer into the night. The cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and the faint smoke of other distant fires. Darkness swallowed the road beyond, but the silence of the night no longer felt empty. It was heavy, watchful. She wanted to speak, to tell him not to go, but the words froze on her tongue. She watched as his figure blended with the night, the turquoise of his necklace catching one last flicker of light before he disappeared beyond the door. Alone now, she wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the fire as though it might keep away the fear crawling through her veins. Minutes passed, or perhaps longer time seemed to stretch in the quiet. She thought of the risks she had taken coming here, of the things she had left unsaid to her family. If it was one of them outside following her, then everything she feared would come crashing down. She imagined whispers spreading through the village by morning, judgment carved into every glance. Worse still, she feared what his people might say. How quickly suspicion could grow between communities already straining to coexist. The door opened again, sudden and sharp, making her flinch. He stepped inside, his face unreadable in the shifting light. He shut the door behind him, pressing it firmly, as if sealing away more than just the cold. "No one," he said after a long silence. "At least no one I could see." His eyes flicked toward the window, lingering as though he did not fully believe his own words. She exhaled shakily, relief mixing with unease. If no one was there, then what had she heard? Or was it that someone had already been there, watching, leaving before he could find them? The thought lodged itself in her chest like a stone. He moved back toward the fire, his shadow stretching across the cabin floor. "You should understand," he said slowly, "the risk of what you've done tonight. If anyone followed you here, if anyone even suspected—" His voice trailed off, but the warning in it was clear enough. "I know," she admitted, her voice tight. "I knew before I knocked, but I couldn't stop myself." Her words hung in the air, fragile and defiant all at once. She saw the conflict in his eyes, the pull between duty and desire. Between the safety of silence and the fire that sparked each time they stood this close. He wanted to send her away. She could feel it. And yet he hadn't. That alone told her enough about what lived unspoken inside him, outside. The wind rose, rattling the logs of the cabin and sighing against the roof. It sounded like the land itself warning them, reminding them of how fragile their choices were in a place where secrets never stayed buried. She wondered who else in the village carried secrets of their own, hidden behind shutters and locked doors. Perhaps she was not the only one stepping across forbidden lines. Perhaps others, too, walked with shadows at night. But her secret was no longer only hers. It had entwined with his now, and together they bore the weight of it. He sat at the edge of the table, his gaze fixed on the fire, though his mind seemed far away. She watched him closely, the lines of his face carved by strength and silence. There was a history there, one she only knew in fragments. She had heard stories of his people, of how the land had once been theirs entirely, the battles fought and the peace uneasily built. He carried that history in every step, in every glance. And she could feel it between them now, a presence as real as the fire. She longed to ask him questions, to pull the curtain back on all the things he never said aloud, but the words caught in her throat, Instead, she asked softly, "Do you regret that I came?" He looked at her then, sharply, as though the question struck deeper than she intended. For a moment, he didn't answer, and the silence stretched until she thought perhaps he never would. But finally he said, "Regret and longing often walk together. One doesn't erase the other." His words unsettled her more than a simple yes or no ever could. She turned back to the fire, her heart pounding with questions she could not name. She wanted to believe this night could exist outside of the world's judgment, a place untouched by the rules pressing down on them both. But she knew better. No night lasted forever. Dawn always came, and with it, consequences. The crack outside had planted a seed of dread that refused to fade. She imagined faces peering through the dark, whispers forming even now. What if someone had seen her slip from her home? What if the wrong person already knew? She thought of the man her family intended her to marry, steady and stern, the kind who would not take betrayal lightly. If word reached him, there would be no hiding, no turning back. He seemed to read the weight of her thoughts. For he said, "Your people will ask questions. And mine." He shook his head, his expression grave. "They will see betrayal no matter the truth. And what do you see?" She asked before she could stop herself. He did not answer right away. His gaze lingered on her face, on the firelight brushing her skin. And she knew then that his silence was louder than any words he could have spoken. She felt her chest tighten, a mixture of fear and a strange, aching hope. The night stretched on, each moment deepening the tension between them. Neither moved closer, yet neither stepped away. They were bound in a fragile balance, standing at the edge of something that could not be undone. Outside, the world remained dark, the unseen presence of danger never far. Inside, the fire burned lower, its light flickering but unyielding. Much like the bond they had not chosen but could no longer deny, somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, the sound sharp in the stillness. She flinched, the unease twisting deeper. He glanced at the door again, his jaw tight. The night was no longer safe, and they both knew it. Yet neither spoke of leaving. Her mind returned to his words. Regret and longing often walk together. She wondered if she would carry both for the rest of her life. Tonight would mark her forever with a wound and a fire that could never be extinguished. Perhaps that was the cost of stepping into his world. Even for a single night, he leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees, the firelight catching the turquoise at his chest. His voice, when he finally spoke, was quiet, almost weary. "Whatever comes after this night, it will not be simple. You must understand that." "I do," she said. Though she was not sure if her voice betrayed her fear, the fire popped. A shower of sparks rising like fleeting stars before vanishing into ash. And still, outside, the dark pressed close, carrying with it the promise that whatever waited beyond the door would not remain silent forever. The night was not yet over, and neither was the danger. The fire had burned low, the logs collapsing into glowing embers that pulsed with each sigh of wind sneaking through the cracks in the cabin walls. The room was quieter now, yet the silence did not bring peace. It was heavy, pressing down on them both as though the air itself knew their secret and trembled with the weight of it. He sat with his back straight, every sense sharpened. While she lingered near the hearth, her hands twisted together, her eyes drawn again and again toward the door. Neither of them spoke for a long while, but the unspoken thoughts filled the space between them. They both knew the night had shifted. The sound outside, the uncertainty of who or what had been near, lingered like a shadow just beyond the walls. The world felt smaller, their choices sharper. It was no longer only about what they felt for each other. Now it was about who might know, who might already be whispering in the dark. Finally, she broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. "If someone saw me, if word spreads." She did not finish. She didn't need to. The firelight revealed the worry in her eyes, and he saw it clearly. He leaned forward, his hands clasped together, his gaze fixed on the floorboards. "Then they will come for answers," he said, his voice low. "They will not come kindly." The thought chilled her more than the night air ever could. She pictured her family's faces, the anger and disappointment they would not hide. She pictured the man she was meant to marry, his fists curling, his voice raised in accusations that would echo through the whole settlement. And then she imagined his people, his brothers, his elders, who would see her presence here as something more than reckless, as something unforgivable. She took a breath, willing herself not to tremble. And if they do? He looked up at her, his eyes catching the faint glow of the fire. Then I will face them. But once the truth is out, there is no going back. For either of us, the words struck deep, a reminder of what she already knew but had tried to push aside. This was not just a night stolen from the world. It was a thread pulling at the edges of everything, ready to unravel the fragile piece that held their lives together. The wind rose outside, carrying the distant sound of hooves against frozen ground. She stiffened, her breath caught in her throat. He heard it too, his head snapping toward the window, his body tense. The sound grew nearer, not one horse, but several, the rhythm steady and purposeful. Lantern light flickered faintly in the distance, weaving between the trees like restless fireflies. Her heart pounded. "They're coming," she whispered. He moved quickly, dousing the lantern on the table, plunging the room into darkness, save for the weak glow of the embers. "Stay quiet," he said, his tone firm, controlled, though she heard the urgency beneath it. He crossed to the door and stood there, silent as stone, waiting. The hooves slowed, voices carrying faintly through the night. Men, speaking low, their words too muffled to catch, but their tones sharp with suspicion. She pressed a hand against her chest, feeling her heart thrum against her ribs. Every sound outside echoed like thunder in her ears. The voices moved past, fading slightly, though the unease did not leave. She dared not breathe too loudly until the last faint sound of hooves was swallowed by the night. When silence returned, it was not relief that filled her, but dread. They had been searching for something or someone. He turned back to her, his face grim. "They were not out for a ride," he said. "They were looking." "For me," she whispered, the truth sinking heavy into her stomach. She had been careful, or so she thought, slipping through the shadows when she left her home. But the settlement was small. Eyes were always watching, even when they pretended not to. If someone had followed, if someone had spoken, then tonight was no longer just theirs. It was already a story spilling into the world. The fear inside her grew sharper. But mixed with it was a strange clarity. This night had always been more than a moment stolen in secret. It had always been dangerous, even before the sound of hooves and muffled voices. The danger was not new. It had only come closer, louder, harder to ignore. She moved toward him, her steps careful in the dim light. "You should have turned me away," she said softly, though there was no anger in her words. "You still could." His gaze met hers, unwavering. "If I had wanted to, you would not be standing here now." Her breath caught, her chest tightening with something she could not name. His words, simple as they were, carried a truth she felt to her core. He had not turned her away. He had not told her to leave. He had let her in, despite every reason not to. That choice had bound them together as surely as any vow. Another sound broke the momentous sharp knock at the door. Not gentle, not hesitant, but firm, demanding. She froze where she stood, her blood running cold. He moved toward the door, his hand hovering over the latch. The knock came again, louder this time, followed by a voice. "Open up." Her heart leapt into her throat. She recognized the voice. It was one of the men from the settlement, a neighbor known for his sharp eyes and sharper tongue. If he was here, then others could not be far. He looked at her, his face set, his eyes burning with unspoken resolve. She shook her head quickly, silently begging him not to open it. But the pounding came again, insistent, echoing through the cabin walls. "Open up," the voice barked. "We know someone's inside." The fire crackled weakly, casting faint light on the tension that filled the room. Her breath came fast, her hands trembling despite her effort to still them. She knew if that door opened, everything would change. Whatever secret had lived between them would no longer be theirs. It would belong to the village, to the whispers. to the judgment that would not forgive. He drew in a breath, steadying himself, his hand tightening on the latch. For a moment, time seemed to pause, balanced on the edge of decision. She watched him, her chest aching, knowing that whatever choice he made now would shape not only this night but every day that followed. Another. His voice joined the first outside, rough and accusing. We saw her come this way. Don't play games with us. Her knees weakened, and she pressed a hand to the table for support. They knew. Somehow, they knew. And once the door opened, there would be no denying it. He looked at her once more, its expression unreadable in the flickering glow. The pounding on the door grew louder, the voices sharper, pressing hard against the fragile walls of the cabin. The night had been theirs for only a breath. A fragile sliver carved from a world that did not allow it. Now that world was at the door, demanding entry, demanding truth. She closed her eyes, her chest heaving as the sound of fists against wood shook the cabin again. Suspense wrapped around her like a noose, every second stretching longer than the last. And as he finally lifted the latch, the question burned between them, hotter than any fire. The latch lifted with a metallic click that seemed to echo louder than thunder. She held her breath as the door creaked open, the cold night air rushing in and extinguishing whatever warmth remained in the cabin. He stood firm in the doorway, his figure a dark silhouette against the faint glow of lanterns outside. The men on the other side shifted, their boots grinding against frozen dirt, their voices rough with suspicion and certainty. There she is, one of them spat, his eyes narrowing as they tried to push past him. We knew she came here. He did not move aside. His shoulders squared, his hand braced against the wood of the frame, his presence alone enough to slow their advance. You've come to my door, he said evenly, his voice low but carrying weight. If you mean to accuse, then speak it plain. The man at the front sneered. No need for riddles. She belongs with her own kind, not hiding here in the dark like some shameful secret. We all saw her leave her house. We all knew where she would run. Her heart hammered against her ribs, the truth of his words falling heavy in her chest. She stepped forward before she could stop herself, the fire behind her casting faint light across her face. Gasps rose from the group outside, and she felt the burn of their eyes upon her. She wanted to shrink, to disappear, but instead, she forced herself to stand tall. I came here by choice, she said, her voice trembling but clear enough to carry. No one lured me. No one tricked me. I knocked at his door because I wanted to. The words left her like a confession, freeing and damning all at once. Silence followed, broken only by the shifting of boots and the low murmur of disbelief. One of the men scoffed, shaking his head. Then you've shamed yourself, and you've shamed your family. This won't be forgotten. He stepped forward then, placing himself fully between her and the gathering outside. His voice grew sharper, the calm replaced by fire. If there is shame, it belongs only to those who come knocking like wolves in the night. She came here with no harm in her heart. If you mean to drag her back, you'll have to pass through me. The challenge hung in the air, and for a tense moment it seemed violence might erupt. The men gripped their lanterns tighter, their anger hot but restrained. They knew the weight of his presence, the strength in his stance, and the respect he carried even among those who feared him. None dared take the first step forward. Finally, the leader of the group spat into the dirt. This isn't over. Dawn will bring questions, and the settlement will have answers. With that, he turned sharply, the others following, their lanterns bobbing away into the dark until only the sound of their hooves echoed faintly in the distance. The door closed again, sealing them once more in the small cabin. But the silence that followed was not relief, was the heavy knowledge of what was to come. She sank onto the nearest chair, her hands trembling as the fire's faint glow touched her pale face. They'll tell everyone, she whispered. By morning, there won't be a soul who doesn't know where I was tonight. He crouched beside her, his hand resting gently on the table as he looked into her eyes. The truth is already out. Now, it's only a matter of what we do with it. Her breath shook as she thought of her family, of the man she was meant to marry, of the whispers that would stain her name in every corner of the settlement. And yet, despite the fear that curled inside her, she also felt something steadier, something she hadn't expected relief. The hiding was over. The secret no longer lived in the shadows. What was left now was choice. They did not sleep that night. Instead, they sat by the dying fire, speaking in hushed tones of what lay ahead. She told him of the life that had been planned for her, of the walls closing in, of how suffocating it felt to be treated as a piece to be traded rather than a woman with her own will. He listened, his silence never cold but attentive, his gaze steady as though memorizing every word. When dawn came, the sky blushed faintly pink above the trees, and the sound of distant voices stirred the air. The settlement was awake. She knew she could not hide in the cabin forever. With trembling resolve, she stood, smoothing her dress as if preparing for battle. "They'll be waiting," she said, her voice soft but firm. He rose too, his frame casting a long shadow in the morning light. Then we faced them together. The walk back to the settlement was heavy with unspoken tension. Eyes followed them from doorways and windows, whispers rising like smoke wherever they passed. Families stood in clusters, some with faces of pity, others with disdain. At the center of it all, her father waited, his jaw set, his arms folded across his chest. Beside him stood the man she was meant to marry, his face dark with anger. She felt her knees weaken, but she did not falter. Standing before them all, she lifted her chin. "I will not lie. I went to him. I chose to." The murmur grew louder, voices clashing in disbelief and outrage. Her father's eyes burned with shame and fury, but she pressed on. "You can call it a mistake, you can call it disgrace, but it was my choice. And I won't apologize for wanting a life that belongs to me, not to your bargains or expectations." The man beside her stepped forward then, his voice strong, carrying over the crowd. "If fault lies anywhere, it is not hers alone. She sought honesty where her own people gave her none. If you wish to punish, then punish me too. But understand this: we will not live in fear of your whispers." The crowd stilled, their anger now mixed with uncertainty. Some muttered of betrayal, others of bravery. But no one stepped forward to drag her away. The balance of the moment shifted, fragile yet undeniable. Her father's face hardened, but something in his eyes betrayed sorrow beneath the anger. He looked at her long and hard before turning away, his silence heavy with words unsaid. The man she was meant to marry spat at the ground, his pride wounded, but he too turned his back. Leaving without another word, in the days that followed, the whispers did not vanish. They lingered like smoke, curling into every corner of the settlement. But with each day that passed, the fire of judgment dimmed. People returned to their own burdens, their own struggles, their own secrets. Life, relentless and unyielding, moved forward. For her, the world had changed forever. She no longer belonged to the path laid out for her, to the chains of expectation. She had chosen differently, and though it came at a cost, it also brought freedom. She walked the settlement with her head high, no longer ashamed of the truth. For him, the choice was not without sacrifice. His people, too, watched with wary eyes, some disapproving, others quietly respectful of his defiance. But he did not waver. He stood by her, his silence now a shield rather than a distance, his presence a constant reminder that love was worth the weight it carried. Together, they carved a place for themselves in the uneasy balance of the world around them. It was not perfect, and it was never easy, but it was theirs. Looking back, she often thought of that knock at his door. It's the trembling words that had changed everything, just for tonight. She had not known then how much those words would alter the course of their lives. She had not known that one night could unravel lies, break chains, and ignite a fire strong enough to withstand the judgment of an entire settlement. But she knew it now. And as she walked beside him, her hand finding his in the quiet of the evening, she felt no regret. Only the steady truth that sometimes the choices most feared are the ones that set us free. The whispers faded. The seasons turned. And though the memory of that night lingered, it did not haunt them. It lived instead as a reminder that courage, once found, cannot be taken away, and that love, once chosen, becomes stronger than any shame or shadow. And so their story, born of fire and fear, ended not in silence but in the simple strength of two lives bound together against the odds, unyielding beneath the gaze of a world that could never truly understand.